Hey, I'm Lauren Culbertson, co-founder and CEO of LoopVOC. Today, I'm chatting with Kevin Lau, Global Head of Customer Advocacy, Digital Experience at Adobe. Today, Kevin and I are chatting about something critically important in today's environment, which is the role of customer marketing. How we engage our customers and support our customers through this time is brand defining, and customer marketers play a massive role in how we execute on these strategies. So Kevin, let's jump right in, shall we?
Sure. Thanks, Lauren, for having me.
Awesome. Yes, we're excited. So Kevin, what are some of the biggest challenges or common misconceptions that you see customer marketers facing in really driving the strategy at a company?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think for most organizations, especially if you're just building out that function, a lot of the times customer marketing is sort of relegated to fulfilling specific roles or requirements around, developing customer stories or fulfilling, sales references or sales requests. But I think the world of customer marketing could be so much more than just those two areas. Of course, those are important for companies to drive pipeline and show awareness for the brand. But I think where customer marketing really shines is where, obviously, just given the name, where you're essentially engaging customers. You're developing relationships. You're developing influencers. You're really aligned to the customer journey. So I think that's really where customer marketers will have the best impact. I think some of the challenges that customer marketing teams face today is just they don't really typically get a lot of the resources that some of the other functions within marketing get, like demand gen or product marketing, etc. And so I think the more you're focused on impacting the customer business from a retention standpoint, that's really where customer marketing shines.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And it's tough, especially for individuals in the customer marketing role, because they kind of have to go above and beyond in their role in order to get that data and metrics so that their leadership can actually give them the resources they deserve. It's, I think, a lot better, obviously, when there's people in the leadership positions that are actually helping the teams do that. But do you have any advice for customer marketers that are in the role for how they can start to gather data like that and kind of empower and improve the influence their role has at the company?
Sure. And I think it really comes down to working with multiple teams internally. So whether that's product, support, customer success, et cetera, it's looking at different data points from, feedback, general feedback, like an NPS score. It's looking at feedback on, how are customers engaging with your content. I think it's also looking at data from, accounts that are engaged with you to accounts that are not engaged. I think customer marketing plays a big role as far as, shaping a holistic view of the customer at the account level, as well as like down to the individual. And so I think there's lots of different touch points you could use to help influence, retention, cross-sell, upsell opportunities. And I think it comes down to, number one, are the customers actually using your product? And I think that's a key data point to look at. Then even beyond that, as you start to develop relationships with advocates, I think you look at just overall engagement metrics, you look at community and how they're active in that from a standpoint. You also look at the type of content that you're building out with customers involved, and whether that's looking at it from a case study perspective, or also looking at, a customer that's speaking at an event. You also look at that data to see if it's actually resonating with other stakeholders and potential buyers too.
Yeah, so kind of spreading the influence of all the touch points and really growing visibility of the role in that process. It's like listening to you just talk about all of the functions customer marketing kind of intersects with. It's funny to think about, prospect marketing really is focused on one thing, which is getting a prospect to become a customer. But it's funny that the role of customer marketing is kind of ill-defined, and yet it's really broad. Like you're
Yeah.
talking about upselling, you're talking about retaining, you're talking about driving adoption. Like, can you see a world where, now that we're becoming more aware and hopefully moving forward on the importance of tying marketing to customer retention? Like, can you see a world where there are different types of customer marketers that are
Just as, let's just take demand gen as an example.
Mhm.
Not every single demand gen marketer does the exact same thing. Some people focus on, webinar pipeline. Some of them focus on social and advertising. Some of them focus on copywriting. And so with that same type of, idea in mind, I think customer marketing, it's sort of a buzzword in some ways because it ties very closely to customer experience. It talks about customer engagement. Some people call it retention marketing. And I think there's distinct ways that you can structure it. Like here at Adobe, we have it structured from an advocacy standpoint and then an adoption standpoint. And so the whole goal is still focused around retention, focused on the customer being successful. But we have very different, ways that we approach that. My team focuses specifically on advocacy, which is, how do we showcase the customers more successfully? How do we tell their stories more broadly so they have a platform to share that experience and help other customers? From an adoption standpoint, it's more about, how do we drive stronger maturity? How do we get customers to understand the value and appreciate the product that they bought and getting actual value realization from using it every single day.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I really like kind of splitting it up into those two focus areas because both have a really wide range of partners, and it seems like it'd be really difficult to put that all on one kind of function. Do you have advice for maybe at SaaS companies where it's just one person in customer marketing and they are really defining how that role is positioned in the company, like where you would start in terms of just the focus areas, if it is on adoption, retention, or upsell, the data you're looking at, just like how, if the mission is to grow the customer marketing team from one person, how do you go about that?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. It's one of those fundamental things that comes up quite a bit. I've been in organizations where customer marketing was a catch-all, where you had to help source speakers for an event, you had to take care of references, you had to do sort of like a jack of all trades. And I think until customer marketers become much more of a data-driven marketer, they're always going to be kind of in some ways pigeonholed in a specific outlook of what the company thinks that they should be doing. And I think if you can start to tie in the programs that you're doing, regardless if it's fulfilling references or building out customer stories or whatever the case is, as long as you can tie that back into savings for the company, ROI, some type of value business metric that your CMO cares about, or your CEO for that matter, that's when your value to the company becomes obviously much more valuable and more strategic. So I think that's what differentiates really strong customer marketing programs versus ones that are just kind of there on the sidelines and people just see them and view them in one specific way versus having much more of that strategic input and a seat at the table.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. My background's in product marketing, and I've worked with stronger and weaker customer marketers. And I found like the intersection of product marketing and customer marketing can be extremely powerful if there's a strategic person in that customer marketing role, because then like when you talk about voice of the customer, I feel like those two together can really kind of source and influence the company and how they're acting on customer data. I'm curious your thoughts on just kind of the relationship between those two roles, product marketing and customer marketing.
Yeah, I think it's one of the critical, and even beyond that, I think there's natural synergies that exist between customer marketing and other stakeholders internally, whether it's customer marketing, customer success. I mean, that's like a natural.
Yeah.
We're essentially leaning on the same end of the rope, trying to help customers and retain them. I think from a customer and product marketing standpoint, I think that gets into a little bit of the deeper level of understanding what's the specific use cases that your customers are having. How should they think about it? How should we position our messaging? How should we, I think it takes it from a different lens. We're taking that outside in perspective, which I think is critical, especially if you're going to run any type of go-to-market campaign. Some companies today completely do the opposite, where it's outside in, and they just think, oh, because we're doing it this way, it makes sense because they have qualitative research to back that up. But I think when you match customer marketing and that product marketing expertise, where you're almost questioning everything that you're doing to get to that right answer, I think that's really one of the key things that will drive more synergy and more success within your company.
I love that. So last question I'll ask, we talked in the beginning about how important it is for customer marketing to be more than just customer stories and references. How can customer marketers, or if they're in the position where, their leaders or cross-functional leaders are really holding them to more stories, more stories, more stories, more references, how can they kind of break that cycle to say no without, getting in trouble?
Yeah, I think sometimes there's some of this like legacy mentality that exists between companies where they're going through that transformation, whether they go from a startup to a mid-sized company to an enterprise. They're used to basically doing things a certain way and kind of expecting a certain result. So it's almost like going through that insanity model. I think you have to constantly be willing to think outside the box. I think there's, especially in this current environment, I can't stress this enough. It's just having the sense of creativity, but also being empathetic in your marketing. So put in mind, like, what's in the best interest of the customer at the end of the day. I mean, for one aspect, you may be creating customer stories just because you need to make your website look nice and fancy, but what's really going to help the customer be successful? So maybe they want to hear a different take on something, like, especially right now when customers are reevaluating what is a strategic solution or technology that they can't live without, or something that's sort of a nice to have. You want to obviously be on that side that's essential services. And so I can't stress enough that it has to be based on building whatever your go to market or your marketing strategy is around what's in the best interest of the customer at the end of the day. So until you start to think about in those terms in the customer journey, you're always going to be put in a certain box around, like you said, customer stories or just fulfilling references.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Tying deep to the outcome of the customer and showing that you are really an expert because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Kevin, for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us. Everybody, leave any comments or questions in the comments below, and we'll keep the conversation going.
Cool. Thanks.